All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 45 today, DMT Entities with Jack from TripWhip. What's going on, Jack?
Not much. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Thanks for coming on. Maurice has the night off for the first time. It was his lady's birthday tonight, so shout out to Emma. Happy birthday. And let's get into it here. So, what got you into making your own movies after you have had these groundbreaking experiences with, different substances, DMT, LSD, psilocybin, whatever's, all the
Right.
different ones?
Um, I think for me, it's probably a combo of wanting someone to talk about it with and also wanting to change people's view on it. I think on taking psychedelics, that is. When the video started, when I did my trip report on DMT, it was at a point where I didn't really have many people to talk about this stuff with. The close, like I would say, the closest of my friends definitely wouldn't, engage me in this sort of conversation. And so I was talking to the dudes who were dealing me the stuff basically about it, and they weren't into it in the same way I was. They were more of take it, watch some TV, and kind of not really focus on that sort of the way it can either benefit your life or just the way it can alter your philosophies on life. And that's why I took to YouTube. I think is like, okay, I've got an opinion about it, and I don't know if I'm crazy or not because there's no one I can talk to about this really. So let me just put it out there and see what other people think about it. But yeah, then obviously it got some of the things I started doing were getting quite a bit more views than I was expecting. And so after that, I thought, well, maybe I also want to show people that it is something that you don't have to be ashamed of. Because even though I was always taking psychedelics in a way that I couldn't talk about with my friends or whatever, and they would actually kind of shut it down when you try to bring it up because it was kind of uncomfortable. It's like, hey, Jack's taking psychedelics by himself. I'm actually pretty worried for him.
Mm.
And so I wanted to just kind of tell people that, hey, it's really okay. Like, you just got to be in tune with what's good for you. And actually taking psychedelics probably did some of the best work on myself that I've ever kind of gone through in my life. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I know your one video's got over a 500,000 views. So, like you
Not
said,
not quite, but yeah.
I mean, I thought it said 500,000 or something. The main one, the DMT one, I think that everybody's seen where you're talking about the machine elves. I don't know what it says on your end of things, but
It might be. I haven't checked it for a while, but yeah, might be more than I was expecting.
but yeah, and I know the comments are all pretty favorable too. I know sometimes the comment section's like a walk of shame if you're just looking through
Yeah.
that if it's your own channel or whatever. But um, everybody says that this is good information. This is something I've experienced. This is something I've thought about. So, and like you said, some people just took it initially as a party drug or as just recreational or whatever. I mean, look, I know when I was in high school, we were using, I've never done DMT, but most of the other hallucinogens we used pretty not recklessly, like we weren't doing anything terrible, but just in the sense that we weren't using them as the powerful tools that they are. It was just more like, oh, cool patterns or
Yeah. Yeah.
flowing carpet and like
Mm.
that kind of stuff. So but and then when we started becoming musically inclined, me and my cousin, a couple of friends and stuff, it really became understood as more of a powerful tool when you're doing like music or art or different things like that.
Mm.
um but I think, what drew me to your video initially, like I told you, is I had, even though I've never done DMT, from what you described, I felt like I knew what you were talking about through some of my meditation sessions. And I meditate for over an hour, a couple hours. So, if I have time, that is. But yeah, it just really resonated with me, what you were talking about, like the oneness and then the lifting of the veil in terms of we're all kind of this one thing, that we trick ourselves into thinking that we are these separate entities, if you will. So if you want to talk
Right.
about that.
Of course. Well, I mean, this is something that I've had to go back and forth with in my own mind because, I've had this conversation with a lot of people who haven't taken psychedelics, and the stance is pretty firm in that your experience of the outside world is the real world. You take some psychedelics and you enter the realm of delusion, so to speak. And I was like, okay, well, it's actually hard to say because I'm arguing with your perspective with a different perspective, and there's no way I can actually mediate between or say one perspective is better than the other. I know that when I've taken psychedelics, I personally feel that that perception of reality is more authentic than this one, and I think that's because it's it's hard to explain. I think maybe it's the fact that there's so much that we can't account for in life, and there's these things that I've talked about in the video, like synchronicities and all those sort of things, and that can be explained explained in the psychedelic experience, and that's why I'm more inclined to believe that side of life. I look at it like this. I think like all these different perspectives that we take are kind of like video game narratives. And in the back of our mind, we have this consciousness, which is kind of the player. And it's harnessing itself through specific organic wiring to have a very unique experience. But this experience is by no means an objective experience. And just by simply altering your perception and or altering the chemicals in your mind, you can alter your genuine perception of reality. And if you haven't taken psychedelics, that doesn't mean much. It's like, oh yeah, well, I drink a lot of alcohol and my perception of reality changes. Not in the same way.
Alcohol is poison, bro. Let's just face it. Seriously, no, alcohol is straight up poison. I don't. I think that the more and more studies that come out, you'll see. There used to be an old study that one glass of wine a day was good for you. Now they're saying they just came out saying no, that's wrong. Any amount of alcohol is bad for you. So in my opinion, I know people are going to drink, have fun, do whatever you're going to do, but don't pretend it's not worse than smoking weed or doing some of these other things. So.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, I think a lot of people in the psychedelic community do rip on the government because of the ways they govern our life and basically legalize the use of something that's poisonous to our body, but criminalize something that, at least I know in my personal experience, can totally save you in a way and can put you on an incredible path and give you poetic insights into life. But I guess I don't think the government has such a bad outlook. I think they're just there's people in power, and people in power don't want to lose their power, and they're probably their power is dependent on this very specific perspective that we all maintain, because it puts us in a position of wanting to make money because it makes us insecure. We feel we identify strongly with our own self and our own body, and we feel very strongly about our image, and that's why we spend so much money often the times, just because we want to alter our image, not for ourselves. We're not spending, often the case anyway, we're not spending money on things that can help us.
I think you nailed it. What you just said, though, is it's more of a place. It comes from a place of ignorance, not that they're ignorant people or whatever, just that they're ignorant to these things, which you kind of have to be if you're, representing the public. You can't be taking DMT. I mean, I guess you could, but in terms of, you have to be one of the more responsible people from that regard. So I understand what you're saying with that. I think part of the why people get pissed, though, is if you look at like weed should just be legal. All right. I mean, it is becoming legal. I know my home state where I grew up in Michigan just passed it for recreational use over 21 years old, and that had a huge impact in helping me with my OCD too, through the extract like CBD and THC oils and different things like that. In the past, those have helped me. So it's just, it comes from a place of, like I said, like ignorance. It's not necessarily malicious. I think people get it in their heads, oh, they're out to fuck us, or they're I think that may be the case for some people, but as a group, I don't think that that's the case. But what you said too about being ashamed of it too. Like, I think that's an important thing too. Like I said, I told you before on air, and people can watch other episodes where I talk about how I use plant medicine to get over my OCD and how it helped me when conventional medicine and CBT therapy, and prescription, SSRIs and all those, absolutely let me down. I had severe depression and OCD. So I think not being ashamed to try things that are natural that have helped people, whether they're indigenous people or whatever. There's people that have been using these things since the beginning of time. But I think that's a major, um, that's a major revelation there about, not being ashamed, because like you said, even now that you say that about your friends, I can't, I couldn't have talked about this shit with my friends when I was in college or whatever. They'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. No, that's exactly right. And that's going to happen when you criminalize something because, well, I guess in a way, it makes me a criminal. And there's no way I think about what I'm doing as something that makes me a criminal. But in a sense, I am, and that's not a nice thing, I guess.
well, weed's
And it's
still
very,
federally illegal in the United States yet. I think latest polls 60 or 70% of people do it. So that means
yeah,
over half the population's breaking the law constantly. So I mean, who
yeah, yeah,
it's
exactly.
crazy.
Yeah, it is. And that's why I think it's really important to know that you just got to be comfortable with doing what you want to do as long as you've got the best interests in for yourself. But it's because it's awesome what you're saying, how, I think it was with mushrooms helped you with your OCD.
Yeah.
Um, and, I personally know that psychedelics helped me with, especially LSD, helped me with quite a bit of anxiety. And they do that for you. And they do it in a magical way. I was listening to a lecture by Jordan Peterson, and he was talking about psychedelics, and he mentioned how there was a study done where they gave a heroic dose of like 5 grams or more of mushrooms to these people who are dying of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not going to survive. They were pretty locked into the fact, and they were um, technically majorly depressed because they were not comfortable with death coming for them, as most of us aren't. And they took 5 grams of mushrooms, and the results were just unprecedented. They never expected these results that were basically that they just became totally okay with what they were at, and they went from being clinically depressed to being whatever fine is referred to as. And then they also talked to them about 6 months later, and I think about 70% of them were in the same place. They were still okay, and 30% of them had become depressed again, but still, I thought that's crazy results. And
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, I
And
know
actually,
personally. Oh, sorry, go
no,
on.
go ahead. Sorry. I was just going to say the FDA just approved trials for psilocybin too for depression.
Really?
And yeah, and I think California, I know Peter Thiel, the guy that was behind the major investments in Facebook and PayPal and stuff. Um, I think he's been trying to promote that too for some, I don't know what his, background is with that, but I know he's been trying to get that passed as well. So,
Awesome, awesome. It's
yeah.
so important. But like, that's the other thing as well. And I think this is why quite a few people do become a little ashamed of taking psychedelics because it is also associated with problems. It's like take psychedelics because it's a medicine. It's like taking antidepressants or something like that. And I think that's also the case to be made is that that's not necessarily true. Um, Psychedelics are like Swiss Army knives of drugs. They can like serve so many purposes, and yep, they can absolutely help you with self healing. They can also give you a very powerful recreational experience. Not that I would use them in that way specifically, but they can. And also, if you meditate on psychedelics, they can just give you, or if you take a high dose of them, they can give you experiences which are totally, I think, contradict probably most of your notions of what reality are. And that may not help your anxiety, that may not help your depression or whatever. Maybe it will, but it might also just be fucking awesome for like the experience itself, and just putting you in a state of awe. Like, you know, psychedelics, they can be used in any all sorts of ways, and just because you're using them doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you.
No, and like I said, I think that's important to point out. But let's also point out they are powerful tools.
Oh yeah.
People shouldn't just be taking these. If you've never done these things, don't just take them. You should do heavy research. If you have any mental, like for me, I knew what my mental status was. I was familiar with these substances already. I knew, I know if people are borderline schizophrenic, you should not be taking this stuff. If you have seizures, you should not be taking this stuff. I know CBD helps seizures, but don't be taking psychedelics. I think it has a huge negative impact on your mental health and will maybe even push you even further into that. So these are powerful tools. They should not be taken by just anybody. I just wanted to point that out because I think sometimes it does get lost and they're perfect for everybody and everybody should take them. I don't think that's the case. I think you have to be mentally prepared for these substances. That's why if you go to the Amazon, if you're going to do an ayahuasca ceremony, they make you do a special diet. They call it the purge for a reason. And a lot of these people, there's a whole ceremony attached to it that prepares you for that moment when you actually do it. And I think that's why a lot of those cultures don't have the kind of drug addiction that, some of the more, Western cultures, if you will, because Western society, people just take things because they have money or time or whatever, and they don't really, they don't look at it like a tool or something powerful. And I think, the some of the indigenous cultures do a good job of relaying that these things are powerful tools. So,
I think whatever reason you're using psychedelics for, one of the most important things to come into the experience is with respect. A lot of respect for the psychedelics. Because if you don't, and people know this, it will humble you. And to be humbled by psychedelics in a high dose, especially, is not a fun experience. Um, and that's also the cool thing about psychedelics is it's kind of hard to abuse them because it kind of, I think it attaches itself in a very strong way with your subconscious. It kind of sometimes it brings your subconscious thoughts to your conscious awareness. And in the subconscious is a knowing of what you're doing to yourself and a knowing of who you are in a deeper sense than your conscious self. So if you take a psychedelic in the wrong ways and you're taking psychedelics to abuse the euphoria and things like that it gives you and not dealing with the things in your life that are causing your sadness and the inclination to run and escape to euphoria from drugs, that's going to be made aware to you. And your subconscious knows that's why you're using the drugs. And all of a sudden, if you're taking this LSD to have a great time because life's shit otherwise, then next thing it's going to be like, hey, you're not doing the right thing, and it's going to hit you hard in that way. So that's what I like about psychedelics as well, because that happened to me too. I got a bit lost on my path, I think, and psychedelics had to kind of punish me a little bit to put me on the straight and narrow again.
oh, absolutely. And I know, um, a couple years ago, I took a big break from smoking and vaping and different things. And the first time I took a hit of weed after that, it was like, holy fuck. I felt like I was on a psychedelic.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes you can build up tolerance to some of these things too, and
Oh, yeah.
forget how powerful they actually are. I know that on what is it, the one of the Graham Hancock episodes on Joe Rogan, he talks about going to the Amazon, having an ayahuasca experience, and the ayahuasca female entity telling him you're smoking too much. That's why you're paranoid. That's why So
Yeah.
I do think that is important to keep yourself in check too, so you're not overusing any of these substances. Moderation is the best key for anything.
Totally. And you got to know why you're using these. You don't want to joke kid yourself, which I was doing the first when I started taking psychedelics, because it kind of gives you this big sense of like maybe productivity or something as well, because it's like, well, it floods you with all these positive thoughts. And it's like, hey, you're good and you can do this and you can do that. And don't be scared of anything. And then you're sober again. And your normal thinking parameters come back, and it's like, okay, I'm actually still scared of that thing. And
Hmm.
so you're like, well, I take these drugs because it improves me. And it's like, you know, sometimes it does just change you like that. But most of the time, it changes you temporarily. And you have to do the work yourself to get back there. And it just shows you that you don't have to be afraid of something. But then when you sober up again, more likely than not, you are going to be still afraid of that. But you have to just kind of reason yourself out of that fear and say to yourself, well, look, I took that psychedelic and it told me I don't have to be. So I know I don't have to be. Let's just, let's brace ourselves and confront this fear. You have to put in the work. And I think a lot of people don't respect psychedelics in that way. They just think it will cure them without them having to do any of the work themselves. That's just not the case.
No, you
And
absolutely have to do the work too. And I
yeah,
think if you use it, and then I think most of the work comes after. It's the feeling that you get afterwards where it's like, I don't want to do that again for a while.
yeah,
Like if it's an intense, journey, then you shouldn't want to do it like, oh, I got to do it again tomorrow. You should not want to do it again for a while, and it should give you insight on what you need to be doing in your life to fix. I know when I have an intense journey, or in the past when I have, um, it's shown me like, what are you doing? You got to do this. You got to do this. This is out of order. This, you got to fix this. And when I'm done, I feel like, oh man, fuck. I just like something ripped me apart, and it's just, you got to kind of pick the pieces back up and, fit them back together.
yeah, yeah. No, that's often the case, and that's the problem. Is that's why psychedelics can be scary for some people as well, because a lot of people don't want to know their shit. They don't want to see what's wrong in their life, because then they're more inclined to have to go fix it.
That's
And
true.
it's not fun to have to fix this shit. Like it's there's a reason why we're not dealing with it when we're sober. It's because it's fucking hard work. But um, I think you got to keep that in mind when you're taking psychedelics as well. Is that um, yeah, if you really want to utilize its medicinal properties, um, and at least its mental health healing properties, then yeah, you are going to have to put in a lot of effort. Um, but and that said, like everyone is different, and I do know people take psychedelics for different reasons than me, and I respect that. Like I can't say myself I would advocate using psychedelics for recreational use, because it can kind of take the joy out of life in a sense, because like you'll just be in a really beautiful scene, and I used to do this quite a bit actually. I'd be somewhere really beautiful, like I'd go traveling, and I just think to myself, man, I wish I was on acid right now, because it would look awesome. And I guess I didn't realize as well at the time that really what LSD was doing was showing me a way to appreciate life that I wasn't at the time, and I didn't have to depend on the LSD to see life in that way. So right now I did trip quite recently with my girlfriend, but other than that, I have not been smoking weed. I've not been taking psychedelics frequently at all. It's been pretty rare my use now. And I find that my appreciation for life has probably been higher than ever before.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
I haven't used, look, I did a few heavy sessions, 5, 6 years ago or something, and I haven't needed to or wanted to since. I did enough of it when I was younger. I did a lot to the point where it's like, I don't ever need to do this again, But then when I had these, depression and OCD things hit me in my early 20s, it was something that I revisited out of desperation, because of my situation. But yeah, I think it's important to put it in perspective and keep it moving. You don't always need it. Some of my best days now are days that I just meditate and go to work, and I just feel great.
Yeah, hell yeah. And that was the funny thing with psychs. Like, I think a reason why I stopped using them as well is because I was like, I really want to respect these drugs and not depend on them for helping myself. Like, I want to learn how to help myself. And recently, I'd been going through kind of a bit of a struggle without even realizing it. And then I took the LSD, and it kind of, showed me the path to getting where I want to go. And I realized it's not a case that these drugs are like cheat codes. It is, quite often the case that we really don't want to see the path to helping ourselves, because it's actually pretty easy to ignore it. And I think, yeah, and I think you have to go through some hard stuff to put yourself in the place where you want to be, quite often. So it is kind of balanced. It's like psychedelics will be like, hey, yeah, you can get to where you want to go. You can get yourself out of these problems. You just have to take this route. And like a lot of people would find it hard to believe that it's that simple that psychedelics can do it. And it's like, no, they really can do that. But the reason why everyone who takes psychedelics isn't exactly there, even after seeing it, is because it's not as easy as it feels in psychedelics.
Yeah, like you said, it's not a cheat code.
It's not cheat
you have to
code.
have the introspection or introspective thinking on top of the actual experience.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and it's cool that I took the break though, because like you, I smoke weed as well after a long time of not smoking, and man, it was like a whole new drug. Yeah, like I decided to meditate on it as well, and I've tried it since, and I didn't have the same result. But when I did this time, it was like a really intense psychedelic experience. It was like the sense of epicness with extremely intense visuals. Like I'd never had anything like that from weed before. So yeah, like whatever your intent in these drugs are, chances are that's probably the experience you'll get. Like even weed can give you a surprisingly psychedelic experience, I think sometimes.
Yeah, no, my one buddy's been looking into this thing called default mode network, which is what your brain does on certain psychedelics that dissolves your ego, if you want to call it that. Or, but the one study he presented was the one with marijuana. They did, which it actually promotes ego within that mode. So I found that interesting because people do just smoke it and don't even think about it. They just, oh, I'm going to smoke and watch my favorite show, or I'm going to smoke
Yeah,
and do
yeah,
this. But it is another one of these things that we're talking about. It's just not as intense, it doesn't
yeah,
grab you. If you do DMT or LSD or mushrooms, you're going to be occupied for a while. Smoking
yeah.
weed, you might be high for an hour or two, but usually, wears off pretty easily.
Right, right. And I think I know with me, meditation taught me a way to make a psychedelic experience more intense. Um, so when I started off in psychedelics, I remember a candy. The first day I ever meditated on psychedelics was a candy flip, and that was with 2 tabs of acid and MDMA, and it was also one of the first candy flips I did. And it was a pretty cool meditation, no doubt about it. But I'd say now, if I meditated on 1 tab or even half a tab of acid, I'm going to have a more intense experience than that time. And I think it's because you learn to let go more, and you learn how to become more comfortable with the experiences you have, and you just hold on less to your ego and to this physical reality you're familiar with. And so that can also happen on weed as well. Weed opens up a little bit of that psychedelic porthole, and if you can just let yourself go in meditation, it will suck you in like all the other psychedelics, and give you that full-blown like holy shit experience.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah,
I 100% agree with that. Like I said, I don't really even smoke that much anymore because, like I said, I don't need to. Once here and there, if I'm hanging out with some people and I just want to relax or whatever,
yeah,
I'll do it. It does help with my anxiety too. So instead of taking like a Xanax or whatever people take for their shit, I would rather just take a hit off something, or
right,
whatever, like a vape pen or something. So,
yeah.
but I want to talk to you about something that you brought up in one of your videos that I find super interesting, which is pareidolia. And for anybody that doesn't know what pareidolia is, it's the way that our brain makes sense of patterns and things. That we put stuff together. So, like for some people, there's the face on Mars. Well, there's not really a face on Mars. It's a mountain range on Mars that certain shadows hit it and it looks like a face. Or looking at a cloud and seeing a rabbit. Well, there's not really a rabbit in the cloud. It just looks like a rabbit.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of what that is. So why don't you explain your experience with that in terms of with DMT and how you were able to figure some things out with that?
Okay, well, I think for me, have you ever seen those pictures on Facebook or whatever where they have like that computer filter where they like film something, and all of a sudden you're seeing dog faces
Yeah,
everywhere and crap?
I know what you're
There's
talking
like
about.
Yeah, just because the computer's set to see that. Well, I remember taking psychedelics and just seeing faces and everything. Where I was like, I had to ask myself, is it the case that um, the geometry of the Earth is so more complicated than I realized, that it is allowing for spirits to see us through these objects, or is it the case that my brain has the very same function as that the camera thing on the that sees all the dog faces everywhere,
Right.
and that's being affected right now by the psychedelic, and I'm seeing faces everywhere. And truth be told, I don't know which one would be true, but that had me thinking about the power of pareidolia, and I thought, well, why is it that I see these faces? And why is it that I have this filter? And why is it when I look into the clouds, I do see images and into complex patterns like trees and stuff? Um, and why is it that that filter is triggered with? And it's like, well, it's probably the case. Excuse me. It's probably the case that you have that filter that allows you to recognize entities in this massive energy field that is reality. It just allows you to see faces where there, and then through the faces, identify an individual where there really is actually no individual. And I think that's what's kind of happening. That's what the DMT sort of showed me. And it's really hard then as well to say that these DMT entities are real when I recognize these DMT entities through the same filter. I'm probably seeing massively complex um, energy fields in my own mind, which contain an intelligence, and then that intelligence is being interpreted through this filter in my mind. I'm seeing this energy field. The next thing, my pareidolia filter sees it, and then it creates an entity
So
where
maybe
there
that
really.
entity, sorry to cut you off, maybe that entity isn't even really there, but the energy that would make up whatever that is, that's what we're associating it to because that's all we know. So we're putting
Right.
a face to something that we don't have an idea or percent. Maybe it's in the fourth dimension, fifth dimension, whatever.
Yeah.
But do you believe that there's a hierarchy among, like, so if we're, you know, stuck in 3D or we're living this life in this reality, do you think there is a hierarchy of entities, or do you think, um, maybe once we die, we become one of these energies that people try and put a face to?
I think there's a video I want to release, which kind of talks a little bit about this, but I haven't put too much thought into it. The answer is I don't know. It certainly feels like it. I think when I go through these experiences, it's like, um,
Nobody's got the real answer. I'm just curious what your opinion is based on your experience. I know this isn't,
right,
nobody's got the answers. If we did, we wouldn't be talking about this right now.
right. Well, I guess for me, it's very. I wouldn't say there's one that's better than the other. There isn't one that's more worthy of existence than the other. But I do think that there is a case that there is, like, you can compare gas to solid objects through their vibrational frequencies. Like, a solid object's a very dense, slow vibration, whereas a gas is a very fast and vibrant vibration. I think that something goes on in our trips where there are the entities that are able to think, or there are energy fields that are far more complex, elaborate, sophisticated, and more full of what I'd call positive notions than other energy fields. And I think the third dimension, the one that we exist in, has access to these higher realms. It also is caught on by these lower realms, so to speak. And that's I think what our depiction of heaven and hell is like this pull between these two
High
realms.
vibration versus low vibration.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Do you ever get I know from talking, I interviewed a guy, Dick Connie's author of DMT and the Occult Mind, and a few other people, this guy Paul who's done it. A lot of people that I've talked to about this claim to get this like ringing sensation as they're going in. Um,
Um,
like a vibration, like a high pitch vibration kind of a thing going on. Have you felt that? Is that something that you've experienced?
I don't have a memory of it. I have heard quite a few people refer to it. And no, honestly, I don't remember actually hearing that high pitch when I was going in. But that would make sense to me. There's a lot of like angelic practices in spiritual tribes, and I think even like yogic practices here. It's
Right.
like people will like just create high pitched frequencies to cleanse the air, and we have an association with high pitched frequencies with this angelic or this transcendent realm. But no, to be honest, I myself, I don't remember hearing that when I was going in.
I mean, a lot of this stuff makes sense. And if you look at probably one of the best scientists of all time, Tesla, he said if you can understand energy, frequency, and vibration, you're on the right track. Or so I forget what the exact quote is, but and you look at what this guy created, Wi-Fi power and Tesla coil and it's stuff that we're using right now. This guy invented 150 years ago. So it goes to show you that you can tap into something. There is something there.
Yeah.
What that is in particular, I don't know. Some people call it like the Akashic record or something like that you can draw from, but so yeah, that was the one thing that I found interesting. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I'm trying to think, I don't really recall when I used to do when I was younger, when I did psychedelics, seen anything that wasn't really there. I of course you imagine things and you closed eye things and stuff like that. But I know when you do DMT, from everybody I've talked to, you do see things that aren't like you're in your room, but you're not in your room. So um, what's the machine elf thing all about? Because I find that like I've asked other people about it. Some people haven't experienced it. Other people have. What on your take? You talk about how they're weaving reality together, like taking this thing from over here and creating these synchronicities. The weird thing about that is our near death episode that we did with our one buddy. He was talking about some book when he was in the hospital after he got hit by this car, this semi, and had this whole thing that this lady recommended this book where it talked about exactly what you were describing from that experience, which is these entities that are weaving our realities together.
Wow. Yeah. Uh, well, see, when it comes to experiencing the things that aren't there on DMT, I actually haven't done DMT on a small dose that many times. The first time I did DMT, it was just I've been looking for it for so long that when I finally got it, I
You
was like
just
so
blew your
hungry.
load. You're like, I'm gonna fucking do this shit.
Yeah, literally, I was like, "Fuck it, I'm probably not going to be able to do this again. I don't want to like take half an hour and then not have the breakthrough and not be able to have the breakthrough ever again. It's like if I'm just going to go for it." So I put everything I had into the pipe and smoked it, and it was probably like way more than I needed because like two tokes in and
Fucking blast off.
yeah, I see like at first I see the room changing for sure. I remember the guy I was with, his face definitely changed. I think it wasn't just how it looked, it was like the meaning of it. And that was as I'm shifting in my mind. I see my friend, he's no longer this person just sitting next to me, he's this impression on space-time that's affecting me, and I'm like, holy shit. So
Was it
like
scary at first? Were you scared?
I have to admit, like, probably for about 20 seconds there, I was pretty terrified. I was like, "Whoa!" Like, I did. It just kind of happened so fast, and then as it's hitting me, I realized, oh, you just took DMT, man. Like, this is an intense drug. But that's actually how I came to contact the machine elves because I was starting to freak out, and then I just said to myself, "Calm down. You knew it was going to be like this. Just listen to what they're telling you." Or what you're hearing or something like that. And I was like, well, hold on. Like, what do you mean? Like, I can't hear anything. And then I just started listening. And as soon as I did, I still felt like my body was being torn apart. But all of a sudden, it just seemed like these entities or this intelligence came up to my ear and started whispering the most profound truths ever. And what they were saying to me, because I could understand it all, it was taking me away from my existence as an ego. And it was like, listen, you're connected to this person and that person, because you're both just inhabiting these vessels of conscious experience, when really you're exactly the same thing. And it just started explaining all this stuff and taking me deeper and deeper and back into my mind. Um, and but they took me into the white light, which is referred to from near death experiences. I have
Mm-hmm.
my opinion on what the white light is. And then I came out of it, and I just said to my friend, I just met the machine elves, kind of thing. Well, actually, at first I was still talking to him as if he was one of the machine elves, which kind of freaked him out. And then and I was talking to my neighbors as well. I thought I could hear their minds, sort of thing. It was a crazy experience.
It is crazy.
And yeah, and then I came to back to normal thinking, and that's when I started referring to them as the machine elves. And the because obviously Terence McKenna has called the entities he contacted machine elves, and a lot of people have just said, hey, like, you've just ripped off Terence McKenna here. And that really was not my intention at all. When I came out of the experience, I just
Well, even if he did, isn't it a good explanation? Like Terence McKenna was one of the godfathers of this whole fucking thing. So, like, if
right,
you're
right.
using a terminology that he came up with, I mean, food. I'm reading "Food of the Gods" right now. I mean, if I talk about shit in there, it's not ripping it off. It's like using somebody with practical experience and then building off
Of
of it.
course. Of course, but even so, I don't think these entities looked like machine elves in any way, other than the fact that they were machine. Um, for some reason, it was an intuitive thing to call them the machine elves.
Let me ask you a question. When I meditate, I see these, like, when I get deep into it, I'll see this like light. It'll be like a ball of light, and then it'll start to change its shape from like a butterfly looking thing into like a machine, kind of like what you're describing. Not necessarily like a machine, but I don't know what the fuck it is. It just keeps
Right,
changing form.
right.
Is that similar to what?
I think so. I think that the white light has a very deep consciousness, and it shares its intelligence through these entities. I think in the same way, it's like you look at old paintings and you see angels coming
Mhm.
down, and they speak to the people and they speak on behalf of God. But it's not God communicating directly, it's these angels. And I
Right.
think it's similar. It's like there's the white light, which is God, but then we experience entities, which is kind of these angels, and it's a translation of the white light. The white light is peculiar as after actually one of my weed meditations, I came out saying that the white light was a stream like that. I saw this in the trip. I saw this like great matrix that like we were plugged into these original entities. There was about
Okay.
three of us, and our minds were being connected to all sorts of parallel lives by this white light.
Did you
And
say three?
three, yeah,
That's
something.
interesting. Go on. We'll bring that up in a little bit, but keep going.
Sure. Well, it was like there was these three guys plugged in, and they were being connected to infinite amount of parallel lives by this white light, and the white light was just this thing that connected us to all of the conceivable universes in the multiverse. So yeah, that's basically what the white light said it was. That revealed itself to be during the trip. But yeah, go on. What about the three guys thing?
Okay, so I mean, three is a very significant number in religion. Obviously, Catholicism, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, power of three. I mean, if you go on and on and on and on,
Mm,
Tesla said 3, 6, 9 are the most powerful things in the, so like it can, you know, go on forever, but I just find that interesting. There's like some mystic stuff. I mean, I like a lot of fringe stuff because I like to take little pieces of things that I think are truth from things that are kind of wacky, there was this mystic um, called Baba Vanga. She was a Bulgarian mystic that died not that long ago,
yeah.
and she was blind. But there was one thing she said. I forget where I was watching it, but she said something that there's always three hovering over. There's always three things watching or something like that. So that when you just said that, I was like, oh shit, maybe there's something, to that.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, I guess. Yeah.
What are you familiar with? Like, I mean, are you a religious at all? Or are you familiar with some of the different religions?
I'm pretty like I'm interested in religion. I've done a bit of googling on a few of them, but I don't like follow them religiously, so to speak.
Because Gnosticism is kind of reminiscent of what you're talking about in the sense that we all are all God, pretty much experiencing Himself through different avenues. Like we're all a spark, we're all a piece of God. And I don't want to go into it because it's kind of complex, but so this aspect of God emanated down. Sophia created this entity, Yalda Oath, that's supposedly the God that created our universe. He made a flawed, you know, version of the spiritual realm, if you will, and that's why we experience, love, hate, the
Right.
full range of everything is because it's an error instead of just experiencing love or good or whatever. But I just found that interesting. Also, the Urantia Papers, which is a channeled work, but it's actually a really hard book to read, and it's pretty interesting in its own right. That every single thing there is pretty much God experiencing Himself through different avenues, whether it's a dog watching the cat, you watching your friend, whatever.
Yeah.
It's Him living through everything, pretty much.
Right. Right. Yeah. Is that the one with Jinn or something like
Okay, so
that?
the jinn, I think that's Muslim, I think.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, that's Middle
Uh,
Eastern tradition. They're like the genies are also known as jinn.
oh, it's because there's been a few people on the Machine Elf video who have been like look into Gnosticism, um, and I thought it was that one that I found the Jinn on, but yeah, look, it's hard to say because there's so many similarities and
Right.
between these religions. It's like solipsism even refers to everything as
Right.
being God, and it's like
Yeah.
um, there's so many ways to interpret it. In fact, sometimes it becomes hard to decipher whether or not you're reading into something too much, or if this all feeds from the same source and it's just being interpreted in different ways. And I would be inclined to think it's the latter. I'd be inclined to think that it does, it's describing a transient experience and it's just being interpreted in different ways. Um,
I mean, I
but
know that's the hot topic is using psychedelics to possibly explain a lot of the stuff from the Bible and different religious works. I just read DMT and the Soul of Prophecy by Dr. Rick Strassman. I don't know if you're familiar with the spirit molecule and stuff.
yeah,
That's his second book where he kind of deviates from the academic path and talks about his heritage with Judaism and why he thinks that maybe people were being selected by God to have endogenous experiences, these prophetic experiences that are written about in the Bible and stuff. It's an interesting book. It's worth a read, if nothing else.
yeah,
But I know that that's been a hot topic is trying to explain things via psychedelics.
yeah. It's for me, it's probably the best path for many people because I didn't actually have a great respect for religion until I took psychedelics, and I think it's because I just didn't see how religion could fit into this world, because of a lot of what it talks about um, is what a relationship between a world that experiences time and a world that is eternal. And for me, it was like, how does an eternal realm fit into this? It is clearly something that is limited or is something that is running out all the time. And then you have these experiences, which well, like there's the experience of time dilation where you basically take DMT and you're seemingly somewhere for years, and then you come back into this world, and your friend's just like, "Hey, man, you're gone for 15 minutes," and you're like, "That's impossible." Like,
That's weird too. That's
yeah,
very weird. Yeah. I mean, I know
yeah,
other psychedelics do it too, but that's an interesting thing to bring up too, because we know there's called the atomic clock experiment where they send a clock up in the atmosphere and then have one down below. And they
right,
do a thing. And the more gravity there is, the more time slows down.
yeah.
So like what is gravity then if it can also be altered by just taking a substance within your own mind?
That's the thing. Like, we just do not appreciate our physical reality at all. And I think that's another way that religion comes into this, because you look at something like Hinduism, where it's a very polytheistic belief, and it has specific gods for different aspects of this life. So it attributes a divine quality to physical properties.
Right.
And that's something that I think people should really respect more, because we've taken this very scientific approach. And hey, like, science is awesome.
Oh, I love
Um,
science too, but there's
yeah,
flaws.
like,
There's flaws. They don't think of it that way, but there's flaws within it.
yeah. And our interpretation of science isn't objective. Science might be as close to objective as you get, but our interpretation of what science means is far from that.
Just
And
take a
so
look at
we,
the double slit experiment. It'll blow your
right,
fucking mind. You know?
fucking, that changed my life, I think. So, exactly. So it's like, if we realize that our interpretation of life as being just this physical thing that science can describe and discern objectively, then you're very close-minded. And if you take psychedelics in a high dose, you're going to be rocked, because that's where I was at. Like, no
I
thoughts or ways
believe
about
you.
it. That's where I was at. Yeah, and it humbled me in a great way. So I think, to help yourself, if you are actually thinking about taking a high dose of psychedelics and you just don't see how psychedelics can change your perspective, maybe read some religion, or some religious perspectives, and just put some respect towards it and say, hey, maybe there is something going on there that these guys are onto that I can't see. And that way, maybe if you take psychedelics and it starts telling you things that would otherwise contradict your belief, you won't be in total horror and shock. But
Absolutely. No, it's a good point. I mean,
yeah.
I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school when I was younger till I got to middle school, and then I switched over to public schools. But I think having that foundation, though, it made me a better person. In the turn, it's one of those things where it's good and it's bad. I was sheltered from a lot of things and a lot of thinking and a lot of realities, but then at the same time, it keeps you humble, keeps you moral. You're not doing
Yeah.
stupid shit,
Yeah.
So I think it's good and bad in that way, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally. And like, I went to Catholic school too, and so much of it is founded on wisdom, as well as like transient experiences. And like, it can save you from going through making mistakes in your life and having to learn from your mistakes. You can just follow a religion and be like, hey, like, this guy Jesus, he seems pretty onto it.
Well, even just
So
I hate that people are like, was Jesus real or not? Was Jesus real or not? I think, first of all, I do think Jesus was a historical, actual figure based on the Pontius Pilate stone, which proves Pontius Pilate is real, and other artifacts. And, it's called like reverse, I don't know what you call it, where Jesus is written, um, people wrote about Jesus in like a derogatory way, meaning that who would write something negative about somebody that's fake. So that's another aspect of it. But just the idea of Jesus as a person, this being that was perfect or led a perfect life or did all the right things or whatever, that's something to strive for that obviously I don't think anybody's accomplished. I mean, everybody's got faults. I can't think of anybody that I know that's perfect that hasn't, at least made a handful of huge mistakes. So
yeah, and like, it's hard to know um, how Jesus was as a person as well, because I know for me, um, there's a lot of things I stand for, which I wouldn't stand for if at one point in my life I stood for the exact opposite thing.
right.
So, like, I think that's also a way in, like, if you're anti-racist, there has to be an aspect of yourself that understands racism for
Right.
you to be against it. Otherwise, you just be totally blind to what racism really is.
Right.
And that's the thing, is like, I think that the shadow self is kind of needed. This non-perfect side of us is kind of needed for
Duality.
us. Yeah, we need that duality to have the perfect version of us. It's just like, it's kind of is, if you have that good, it casts a shadow.
Right.
That's for me, that seems to be how it is. And in the same way, that's what makes you perfect, and that's okay to have that shadow, because that's what helps you have the thing that the shadow has been cast by.
I think that's one of the most ill-conceived, or I guess most passed around things, is the ego dissolving thing that people like to say, "Oh, I'm going to dissolve my ego," or "Oh," I think that's one of the most misconcepted things that people pass around. In from the standpoint of, I think your ego can be a good thing if you feed it good things. Meaning, um,
Right.
it doesn't have to be this, oh, look at me, oh, it can be a thing where, oh, I'm a competitive person and I'm gonna play by the rules and be a good
Yep.
person, but I'm still gonna use this thing to push myself. And the reason why I say that comes from when I like I said, I have a background in music. I love playing music. I'm a musician, recording and playing live and different stuff. Um, there's a certain amount of ego that's involved with that. You don't become a good guitarist from just looking at notes or
Right.
whatever. For me, it was like, I want to become Trey Anastasio from Fish, or I want to be like Stevie Ray Vaughan, or I
Yeah.
want to achieve this. So there's a certain amount of ego that gets involved with that. So I don't think it's all negative. I think if you can keep it humble, um, while still using that as like a drive or like a tool, I think it can be powerful. And I think people misuse it and then just think, oh, I'm going to dissolve my ego by taking these substances.
Yeah.
And I don't
Yeah.
think that's the case.
And already they've got the wrong mindset, in my opinion, anyway, which is that um, they have a big problem with themselves. If you want to help yourself, if you want to put yourself in a state of healing, there's these kind of like mindsets which will do that, and acceptance and self-acceptance is one of those things. So if you're going there with the intent of, and I know this is the same for meditation, at least from what I've heard, if
Right.
you're going in there with the intent of changing yourself, you've already gone in there with the wrong intent, because you are who you are, and the thing that you want to strive for, even though that's kind of a paradox, is self-acceptance.
Yeah.
And so if you have an ego, instead of putting all your efforts into fighting that ego, and instead of making an enemy out of your ego, why not use them as a friend?
Right.
Why not say, like, because all of your friends may have qualities that you're not too fond of,
Right.
but they give you plenty of good as well. And I think that's the same with ego. I think that's the same with most of our qualities, because humans have a tendency to wage war on themselves. If we have anger and it does something for us, that's, well, not the best once in our life, you get too angry with someone you actually quite like and it ruins the friendship, then, you want to just rid yourself of anger, period.
Right.
That's not the way to go about it, though. That's just to say, hey, look, anger, we got you kind of unchecked there for a bit, lost control, but you're a part of me, and I love myself, and I know that you're a part of me for a reason. So let's utilize you. And I think that's a better approach than saying, anger, I fucking hate you, I wish you weren't there, and all the rest of it.
No, I mean, I think it's this, like I said, it's like what you just described. And it's this like little tool. Like we can keep our ego as like a tool and just keep it in our back pocket, keep it in check. Don't feed it. When you look, I catch myself because it's like, I'll get in like an ego mode and then it just like starts to snowball. And before you know it, you're like, oh, you're saying things that you regret saying, or you've done things that you regret doing, and you have to like
Sure.
think about it, and then you catch yourself. Lately, I've been trying to catch myself before it even gets steamrolling. So, but sometimes you lose yourself in the moment too. But I think if you can recognize it, that's the biggest thing you can do for yourself, is just acknowledge that it's there, accept it, and understand and move on from there. Like you said, you can't go into meditation assuming that just the meditation is going to fix you. You have to go into meditation, use introspection, and say, and I like to replay things and be like, fuck, like put myself in the other person's perspective and think about how things would sound, or ways things are said, or different things, and think to myself, I'm not going to say that the same way again, or I'm going to apologize to this person, or things like that. Just
Yeah.
because there's no way to just fix it. The next time you just have to work on it.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And I think a part of that as well is, at least what I found, sometimes I can be a bit maybe harsh on myself, and that can actually sometimes give me quite unpleasant trips as well. Is when I look back into the things I've done, and am a little bit, well, quite critical of, how my exchange with someone else.
Right.
But, respect that you are working on yourself. And the only reason why you feel bad is because you want to be a good person. You wouldn't feel bad if you didn't give a fuck about how other people felt.
That's true.
And yeah, and that feeling of want to help other people, that comes through in your exchanges with them. And I think as long as you're forgiving of these other people as well, they'll be forgiving of you. And that's a big part of it.
I was going to ask you that though. Have you had any super negative? I mean, I've heard you talk about your positive ones and your videos and stuff, but have you had any negative ones that's influenced you in a good way from having a negative experience?
So before I ever actually did the psychedelics I advocate, I had quite a bit of experience with synthetic weed, which I am pretty strongly against.
I heard that that's some fucked up shit. I know people, well, you see the news too, people doing fucked up shit on it, but I know people that have tried it that's out of their fucking minds.
It's fucked, man. It's so fucked. And
don't do that. No synthetics. Do not
yeah,
do not use those substances. They are made up substances. They are synthesized in different countries that don't have regulations, that don't give a fuck.
Yep. And they're sold by people who don't give a fuck about you at all. And yeah, like the first time I ever had synthetic weed, I thought it was real weed. Someone brought it over and smoked it and was like rocking back and forth on it. And I was like, man, this must be some fucking strong indica or something. So, I packed a bunch into my pipe and I smoked it. And, 10 seconds in, I realized.
Did it look like weed? I don't know I've never tried it or seen it. I know nothing about it.
Once you've seen synthetic weed and know it's synthetic weed, you can recognize it. But at the time, it looks just like weed to me. So I just chucked it in and smoked it, thinking it was normal weed, and it even tasted actually similar enough to me. Like though it was the pipe, so I probably had like residue effects of a residue taste of real weed. But 10 seconds in, I realized it was not weed because I was like having a full blown ego death experience, and to this date, my most intense trips have been on synthetic weed. But the first trip I ever had on it was actually, it blew my mind away. And I was like, wow, that was just so beyond profound. Not in the same way that DMT and stuff is profound. It wasn't like that. It was just so mind altering that I was like, well, that's just, I did not even know you could have that experience. So I chased it quite a bit. And I had 4 experiences on synthetic weed, which I was convinced I was going to die, simply because it was so painful and negative that I just didn't think a person could live through that. And yeah, I definitely know now that people can take a lot more pain than I thought without dying. That's for sure. But it was some fucked shit. And because of those experiences, I did a lot of crazy stuff on normal psychedelics. So, I'd mix psychedelics and take high doses of psychedelics, and I do so pretty fear-free because I always thought to myself, well, no matter how fucked this gets,
it's not going to get worse than that one. Or
exactly. So and I probably put myself through a lot more than I would ever go through again. But I never really thought of them as negative experiences because they were nowhere near as negative as the synthetic weed.
Well, I mean, I've seen people. There's news stories of people eating people's faces off and shit, and having, I think a lot of that, like I said before, if somebody's got a mental problem to begin with, depending on what that mental problem is, but you should not be doing psychedelics in the first place. And I think people hear the word weed, they think, oh, it's weed, but synthetic weed can be more intense than the most intense psychedelics, like you're saying. So stay away from them. They're bunk. Do not take them.
Yeah.
I've always had the rule for myself: if it doesn't grow from the ground, fuck it. So
that's a good rule because it's something that I'm not entirely comfortable with talking about because like I really am a strong advocate of these other psychedelics, and I don't want people to just like hear me as this guy who's like done drugs that are so fucked as well, and then think to themselves, well, I ain't going near that DMT stuff because he did synthetic weed as well. It's like, look, like I admit synthetic weed I took, and I don't regret it because it's what fueled a lot of my other trips and my positive thinking in my other trips. But there really is just no way on earth I would compare synthetic weed and its trip to any of these others, because it's not the same type of profound. It does not take you to the same places. It's just, if it's a good trip, it's like a like when you drink alcohol, it's just good because it feels
Right.
kind of good. And if it's a bad trip, just yeah, it's you don't have to go through that bad.
Well, again, it's synthetic. I think
Yeah,
what makes DMT so special is the fact that, like we've talked about, it's an endogenous chemical. It's in our
yeah,
bodies. It's in
yeah,
most of nature and mammals and everything. And
yeah.
if we didn't have the MAOI inhibitors in our gut, you know, you could eat a salad and trip your fucking face off. So
Right. Yeah.
it's weird to think about it like that, right? You know, like
I know. I know.
I had an experience where I was thinking about that, um, and I thought about like what would our life be like, um, if we didn't have those MAOI inhibitors, or what if at some point we didn't have those, and that's what
Right.
brought us here, you know? Like, so
Right.
I had a weird like a mind experiment going on, and I had just watched this TED talk about, um, are we hallucinating our reality? I think was the title of it. And it was interesting and thought provoking, but I mean, some of these science guys, they look at it through the lens of pure science and reductionism as opposed to a greater meaning or a greater purpose. So it's tough to take, a lot of these guys at their words that have never experienced some of these things.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's why I think there's such a different sense of um, profoundness in these experiences, because DMT is shared with all these different organic forms. So when you smoke it, it does really seem to take you to a place that you're familiar with, that is really fleshed out and full of meaning, because it's probably something that belongs to not only you, this transitive realm. I mean, because it's probably something that belongs to a lot of other organic forms, and it's just in the back of your mind there, and it's just not, you can't be connected to it because of your specific chemical wiring. But if you take back that wiring, then we all have that same base existence, probably. And I think that's why, and you go to the same place as well on LSD and magic mushrooms sometimes, as well, which is really interesting. And that's something hard to wrap your mind around. But I guess there are certain drugs that just would, I guess, open your third eye, so to speak, and take you to the same realm of existence. And that's why, even getting back into the negative trip question, I think the difference between negative trips on traditional psychedelics and negative trips on something like synthetic weed is that negative trips on traditional psychedelics can show you things. And they can be negative because they're teaching you things that you just didn't really want to acknowledge in yourself.
Right.
I have had probably one bad trip on traditional psychedelics, and it wasn't bad for the whole thing. It was when I took about 3 grams of mushrooms, and I took it when I was in a really kind of a bad headspace.
Like a
I
bad
was,
idea.
yeah, yeah, and
But it can be, you can get positive out of it too. But yeah, you
oh, of
never want
course,
to go into something like that with a negative or some like traumatic thing or
no.
family event, like anything negative that can be associated. You never want to go in with that hanging over you.
Unless you want to have a negative experience, because
That's
that's what's going to
true.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is what started happening, is I just started feeling a overwhelming sense of fear and anxiety and sadness at once, and I had no idea where it was coming from, so I also felt powerless. And then finally, luckily, because I'd taken acid and it told me that I had a lot more power in each moment than I realized, I said to myself, hey, I don't have to think so negatively right now, and I don't have to be this sad. And I kind of latched onto that thought. And through that thinking, it actually showed me the cause of it. And it showed me that I'd kind of wronged a friend of mine. So I immediately messaged that friend, apologized sincerely. And it was like a curse had been lifted, and it just stopped being negative immediately. Like, it was seriously profound. So, in that way, I think that these psychedelics that I advocate, these what would be referred to as like the traditional psychedelics, or the serotonergic psychedelics, they are the ones that are there to help you, and they are there to show you and teach you and have things and have their own consciousness, so to speak, and their own intelligence, that when you take them are shared with you. And it's those ones that I advocate, not the ones that just fuck up your own intelligence.
Right.
So it's like, you know, you can learn from weed. Anybody who knows smoking weed is not just like it fucks you up. It can make you think very deeply.
Sure.
That's not the same most of the time. That's not the same with alcohol. Most of the time, that's not the same with snorting cocaine or you know, these other drugs. So everyone's different. Everyone uses drugs differently. But for myself, I kind of stick to the rule of like, hey, if it's not there to really teach you something, and if it doesn't have that effect, it's probably not good for you.
It's an interesting concept. I want to go back to the one thing about pareidolia real quick.
Sure.
Like I said, I don't know how far I am. I think I'm like halfway through Food of the Gods. But part of it in the beginning talks about obviously people have heard the stoned ape theory. I know Joe Rogan always talks about it. People, you know, now make fun of it, but I think um, after reading part of this book so far, there's some cool stuff in there that I think could relate because like you were
Well,
talking about.
I don't know much about it, so I'd love to hear.
Okay, so
Explain.
like the thing you were talking about pareidolia, I mean, Terrence McKenna talks about how maybe eating mushrooms created more of a visual IQ for us, you know, through evolution. So we're allowing us to better facial recognition, smoothing of edges, that kind of a thing. So what you were saying about how when you go into there, that kind of a thing dissolves would make sense from the standpoint of maybe that's how we used to be before we've developed this other side of things, if that makes
Yeah,
sense to you.
yeah, that makes sense. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that was the case, because it does seem to take you back to a very primordial form of existence. It's like um, this is what you were before anything was subjected to evolution. That's
Right.
kind of how it feels. It's
And
just
that's
like
what I
this
was just
is.
saying too about wondering what it would be like without having the MAO high inhibitors and like
Yeah.
constantly um you know, it's crazy to think about. I mean, I don't know the science on that. I'm sure scientists can probably pinpoint roughly when we developed those receptors, you know. But I think the other thing too is what you were saying about the serotonin. A lot of these psychedelic drugs play off of your serotonin that most people don't realize that they either like replicate or play off of that. And I think that's why they help people with depression, OCD, anxiety, whatever, because it's maybe be filling in the gaps or reigniting something that's been lost in, you know, with those receptors, you know.
Yeah, that's interesting because I wouldn't be surprised. I think the when I'm in my highest moments on psychedelics and I'm not feeling any of the anxiety or sadness that I otherwise would feel, um, it does feel like I'm connected to a true form of existence. And so it does seem like somewhere along our evolution, we've been listening to ourselves and we've been disconnected from the outside world or something like that. And we've turned to our internal thoughts and we've gotten lost in them a bit. And like, you know, it's cool in its own way because it's probably overthinking that's caused civilization. But at the same time, it's overthinking that's brought about depression and longing and a lack of worth and, you know, everything else that comes with it. But yeah, no, that's pretty interesting. Do you think would you put credit in the Stone Ape theory?
After reading this book, I think there's more to it than I thought there was, if that makes sense.
Yep.
I like to look things through a critical lens usually, and I take the bits and pieces, whether it's fringe or mainstream or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, I take the bits and pieces that fit with I'm trying to develop my own theory of everything or my own truth platform, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, and I've looked at biocentrism, which is Dr. Robert Lanza, that we create reality through our biology, like, you know, and it builds this memory, and that's an interesting thing. There's Tom Campbell's My Big Toe, which is we're living in a simulation.
Oh yeah.
That's this like platform. I mean, are you familiar with simulation theory at all?
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard a few of them.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've looked at a lot of those. I'm just trying to get my own truth, if that makes sense. And that's just something that fascinates me, and I'm drawn to and that's why we started this podcast. Is I started getting interested into this, and I hadn't really been a big book reader since obviously school, you know,
Yeah.
ended. And I recently, the last few years, have been reading a lot of books, listening to a lot of books, watching a lot of YouTube videos, listening to a lot of podcasts. I'd rather listen to a podcast now than listen to music, and I'm a musician
Yeah,
too. So
yeah,
if that says anything, but I'm just a big information gatherer, if that makes sense, and kind of using my OCD for good in that
right,
sense.
right,
Um, but yeah, I would just say that I think that there's probably something more to the stoned ape theory than, when it's described, it's like, oh, they came down from the trees and ate cow patties, but there's a whole scientific side of that book that people usually don't talk about. And they've talked about it when Dennis McKenna's been on Joe Rogan and stuff. But when
right.
people mention it in passing, it's like, oh, whatever. And I just think that it was weird too because it popped up as the top thing on my Audible, and I had a free credit for the month, and I'm like, oh, all right, well, let's give this a fucking whirl.
Hmm.
And just listening to it, it's just yeah, I think that I don't necessarily think it's the answer to evolution, but I mean, our brains definitely have doubled and tripled in certain points of evolution that really can't be described. The best other academic explanation is we started to cook our own food, and the proteins from that built a bigger brain. Same thing with how we became more hominid from our ancestors, which is we were eating sweet fruits from the trees, stuff like that. So I don't
Right.
know enough to obviously dispute those things, but I think anybody that's taken these substances can see that they have a huge impact for sure. So
Absolutely. That's the thing is, I think if you have high enough intelligence, or at least a high enough curiosity, um, you're naturally going to go about thinking a lot more and questioning a lot more after a psychedelic experience. So I can imagine easily an ape of a decent intelligence and a decent curiosity. I mean, apes have that curiosity because they make
right,
tools. You don't have the longing, you don't have the wonder of, hey, I wonder if this rock can help me in a way if you don't have that curiosity in your mind.
right,
So if they were to take psychedelics, I can imagine it would propel their curiosity and their questioning and their thinking. And in a very real way, I do think that those things could be responsible for a massive surge in intelligence and a massive surge in civil thinking. Um, but yeah, I haven't done much research on the stone ape theory. Well,
like I said, it's
myself.
worth looking into. I mean, look,
Yeah,
you're into all this stuff. Um I think it's one of the better psychedelic reads pertaining to like that kind of a scientific aspect that I've read.
awesome.
Um, and like I said, I mean, I'm into all sorts of stuff. I read books on like physics and quantum entanglement and all sorts of shit
Yeah,
like that. So, and that's what's pointed me also in this direction is a lack of scientific proof too. We're just supposed to
yeah,
accept, oh, this is science, and science is basically just another religion in the sense that
yeah,
you know we're told that time is the fourth dimension, but there's no proof that that's the case. And you got the top physicists like a Sean Carroll who goes on and on and on about how consciousness is just a byproduct of biology, just like how when we breathe air, we can't see air but we're breathing it, kind of thing. Like that's his analogy. But and yet they use math and probability, but they can't actually prove anything. And the fact that our universe is made up of like 95% of dark matter, we don't even know what dark matter is.
yeah,
We
yeah.
just got into the gravitational wave thing, so there's all sorts of crazy shit going on in the universe that we just have no concept of yet. We sit here and pretend to ourselves that the new reductionist Newtonian outlook that whatever is here is here,
Right.
and that's all that there is.
It's crazy. Like it was actually technically metaphysics, I guess, that got me into thinking about parallel universes and that sort of thing. Um,
Do you believe
and
like the multiverse theory? Are you?
yeah, I would say I do. I'd say after reading up on the slit experiment, and how your perception determined which reality existed. I that like that blew my mind when I read that experiment, and I think that probably has played a part in my interpretation of my psychedelic experiences as well. Um, but yeah, when I read that, I just thought to myself, how can we take the concept of what we see as real when there is technically science in front of us that is trying to contradict that as well?
Right.
So I would definitely agree with you right now as well that science for many people is also the modern day religion.
Well, and like I said, it's lacking. Do like people shit on
Yeah,
religion, but I mean, it's the same thing. It's we're
yeah,
we're we're just guessing that the Big Bang happened. What happened before the Big Bang? Now that they're saying that there was something before, and it was just this dense cloud that, and then now they're saying, oh, it could be a cycle, and then we're going to go back to that dense cloud, and then re Big Bang over and over and over and over again. So I mean, who knows? I
yeah.
recommend that you read Tom Campbell's My Big Toe, which is the simulation theory book. He worked for NASA. He's kind of a credible scientist who talks about like OBEs and meditation and
Oh
stuff.
wow, cool.
He also talks about the double slit experiment and how it can be replicated possibly on like a bigger scale, whether it was a microwave or a person or whatever. So there's some interesting stuff there. The thing I think that his work lacks, though, is what we're talking about, which is psychedelics.
Yeah.
He briefly mentions it and says, "I have no need to do them. My mind is my main tool. I don't want to fuck with it," kind of a thing. Like that's his take on it. So I think that's where his theory loses me, is not even taking into, he doesn't even have to do them in my opinion, but just to acknowledge that that's just another aspect of it. So I think that would,
A lot of people probably don't appreciate what psychedelics are as well, and are just a bit afraid of them. If you've only had experience with drugs through like alcohol or prescription drugs, then you probably think psychedelics just aren't what they are.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap it up here. We've been actually talking for a lot longer than I thought we had. We're definitely going to have you on again. We'll get you back on here when we got the full team of Mike and Maurice. But let's plug your stuff. So you got your channel TripWhip. Do you have any other websites or anything, or
No, it's just TripWhip.
just TripWhip? Check it
Just
out.
TripWhip. Yep.
And you can check us out at Mike and Maurice's Minds, or Mike and Maurice Mindescape.com, and our Patreon account, patreon.com/, Mike and Maurice. Jack, dude, this has been awesome. It's probably one of the better back and forths I've had in a while, pertaining to this specific subject. And I just want to thank you again for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, man. This is, as I said, probably the first podcast thing I've done, and it was freaking fun. So I'd love to come back. That's for sure.
Awesome. Well, we got plenty left in the tank. There's a ton of other shit we didn't even get to, so we'll get to that next time. But thank you all again, and peace out.